Change will launch the next chapter of your life, whether you want it or not. Change is everywhere. It's essential. Change is so much a part of life that we're not even trained how to do it. It's like paying attention. Have you ever been taught how to pay attention? You're told it's important, but did someone tell you how to do it? Most change is incremental. It's just part of life. If we think about it at all, we just say, oh, that's just what life does. We might use a term like status quo. But then there are these events, these big events that pivot life into a new direction. And these events are like a big disruptive crack in our status quo. But inside that crack is the potential and the possibilities to intentionally, deliberately design the next great chapter of our lives. Now, these events could be planned for, like retirement. It could be a career change. It could be sudden, like an accident or a lottery win. It could be a great event. It could be welcomed. It could be regrettable. It could be devastating. The thing is that these events, regardless of the how, the why, the when, and the what, will change one way of life. It's gone. You don't go back. But you don't get to jump into the next new chapter of your life right away. There's a transit. There's a transition from the way life was to the way life will be. I'm going to name a couple of these events. And I'm going to ask you to listen to the events that I list. And I'm going to ask you, if you hear one that you have experienced, please raise your hand. If you hear a second one that you have experienced, raise the other hand. And if you hear a third, please stand up. Marriage, divorce, retirement, career change. Keep the hands going. Career change. Death of a loved one, a spouse, a parent, a child, a partner. Inheritance, major career change, a windfall, major health change. Okay, just keep standing, please. Keep standing. So from my vantage point, it looks like the majority of the room has two hands up. And it looks like the majority is standing. Now I'm going to ask, those of you who have been trained to manage change, please sit down. Everybody else stay standing. If you've been trained how to do this, sit down. Okay, just for the record, the majority of those who are standing are still standing. Now look around. We are not alone when we go through these major events. We are all in it. Thank you so much. So you've been through these events and you know that change can happen quickly. You know that transitions take years. And you also know that the transformation that happens as a result lasts a lifetime. Now you've just done this, so think about it for a moment. Think about one of those transitions that you stood up for and raised your hands for. How did it transform you? How are you different now because of that event? It's kind of big, isn't it? I'm going to tell you a story about an event that changed my life, that transformed me. It was back in the mid-1990s. Before I was a financial transitionist, I was a certified financial planner. And I was trained to manage money. I was not skilled and trained to manage change. So I'm having lunch with a lawyer who's telling me about the women in a class action lawsuit. He was representing them for some medical complications, serious medical complications. And he was telling me about all the changes in their lives. They were leaving marriages that didn't work for them because they eventually would be able to support themselves. They were buying cars and houses that they would pay off when the money came in. They were making commitments to their parents, to their children, and themselves that they would fulfill when the money came in. I knew this was a problem. In fact, my immediate feeling was, these women are in danger. So I said, how many of these women will have any money a year after you get it for them? And he said so nonchalantly, slim to none. He saw the look of horror on my face, and he said, it's not my job. I said, it's got to be somebody's job. If it's not your job, it's my job. This is not okay. 300 women going through something like this? This is not okay. So I assigned myself this new job. I had a habit of doing that occasionally. And then you have to figure out, how am I going to fulfill that job? So I was going to write a white paper for the law firm, let them distribute to these women who I would never know and never meet. And it was the regular financial literacy things, you know, spending versus saving, about credit, about cash flow, the basic financial literacy things. While I was starting to outline that paper, the company they were suing went into bankruptcy. And so, I imagined, did many of the women. This is not okay. I was doing some retreats and some workshops for women in transition back in those days, called Women, Meaning, and Money. It was basically financial literacy kind of things around life-changing events where the money changes and the life changes. And I started to notice that some of the challenges of the women with the class action lawsuit were showing up in the widows, in the divorced women, in the inheritors, people that were in these groups. I started to see it wasn't isolated to that group. This was happening everywhere. And the more I thought about it, and I did think about it, those women really never left my mind or my heart. I can think about them today, even though I still have never met them. Something was missing. I started to look around, and I realized these challenges of transition transcend age. They transcended gender. This is not a woman's issue. This is a human issue. It transcended education, preparation, sophistication. I was working with some of the leaders in the financial services industry around their life events, and they were fine on the money side. Everybody's kind of trained on that. You can get that. That's information that's important. It was the human side, the personal side, that they were struggling with. Something was missing. This idea of financial literacy wasn't cutting it. Back then, we didn't talk about transitions. I never even thought of transition literacy. I just knew something important was missing. So I started to look around. Someone tipped me off on change management, and I couldn't study it within my own industry. I had to go out to science, to business, and on. There were many different disciplines around change management. And what you get when you go out there is you frequently get that ever-present image of the butterfly and the caterpillar. Love that stuff, right? I wear a butterfly all the time. But let's think about that. That transition that they make, that metamorphosis that we all like so much, is not magical. It's actually pretty complex and really messy. But they get to do it in private. They get to form this little tidy chrysalis, this little cocoon, and it all looks fine, and we ignore it until out comes the form and the final stages of the butterfly, and voila, there's a transformation. Yay, let's all do that. Well, we don't get to do that, right? We have to do this in public, in front of everyone in our lives. It takes a long time. We don't get to not pay our bills or get the kids to school or go to work or take care of ourselves and all those things. Life is going on, and we have to do this whole transformation of ourselves out in public. I call it power cocooning. I think it might hit home with some of you. We're expected to just muscle through this stuff and figure it out. Remember, we're not trained how to manage this kind of change. So the more you look at transitions, you find out right away that all the different studies of transition always show stages. Transitions don't just happen, they happen in sequential stages. Understanding the stages, understanding where you are when you're going through these really helps. It helps us understand that there are challenges in that stage, and there are possibilities and opportunities and that sort of thing. So we too have those stages. We human beings go through 4 stages. The first one is anticipation stage, and that's when you're actively thinking about and responding to an event that hasn't even happened yet. The date, the amount might be unknown. In the case of the women, it wasn't even guaranteed. In that stage, what you want to watch out for is future spending. That's what tripped them up. They had already spent, probably overspent the money that wasn't going to come. They were really in tough shape. What we can do, or what financial transitionists would recommend that you do, is manage expectations. Manage expectations. And the expectations are our own expectations, what it's going to be like when this happens, and the expectations of others. We usually live in some community, so people have expectations along with us. The next stage, the ending stage, that's the easiest one to identify. That's when the divorce papers are signed. That's when you've gotten married. That's when the retirement happens. That's the date of retirement. But this is a time when a lot has to happen. You've got meetings, you've got technical things, you've got paperwork, you have conversations, you might have new responsibilities that you never really had thought too much about. So it's complex. We're presented with decisions that, once made, might change the rest of our lives. This is a big time. But it's a time when the people around you that are supporting you might be saying, oh, get over it, let's get going. It feels overwhelming, not just to ourselves, but to others. But you can see how without transition literacy, you could make regrettable decisions in this period of time. So the tool that we looked at there had to be some way to sort, prioritize, and organize what needs to be done, because overwhelm, anxiety, fatigue, short attention span are common. So what we did is we created something called a decision-free zone, which is not a no-decision zone. It's a proactive time out from making non-essential decisions. So what you do is you take everything you're thinking about, all the shoulds or the coulds or the things people say you're supposed to know, all the things you don't want to do, the people, the numbers, whatever, and just kind of do a brain dump. Put it on a piece of paper. Now all of a sudden, all this stuff up here fits on one piece of paper. So all of a sudden it feels a little more manageable. And from there you can start to organize. Your first step is to look at anything that is absolutely urgent, that if you don't tend to that, whether it's about money or about relationships or where you live or your health, there's something really detrimental that could happen to your well-being. So those are the things you get to, just those. Everything else is in a soon or a later category. Nothing particularly technical about this, but when you have a way to sort and prioritize, you can move from feeling anxious to feeling calm. You can move from feeling overwhelmed to feeling confident. And you can start to make one good decision at a time. Once all that gets done, it takes about a year generally, then we move into the passage stage. And as you can see, the passage stage, it could be a time of chaos, of fear, possibilities. It's the trickiest of the stages because it lasts a long time. Passage takes years, generally many years. And in the passage stage, this is when that transition fatigue, it's what the financial transition is called, transition fatigue shows up. And the toughest part of that is this time frame. So our support team may be getting weary of the same story. We tell the story over and over again as a way of self-soothing and as a way of kind of checking in, figuring out who we are, where we are right now. There's kind of a loss of identity there. It's always great if you have people around you who will normalize that. I will say, well, that's understandable. You're in transition. You're still in that transition part. So we want to keep going when we're in that passage stage. And the tool that we use in that is called reinvention. You can kind of figure that out. There are lots of ways to do reinvention, but it's not a one and done. Reinvention is something that happens in intervals over the years of transition. It's exploring, tasting, maybe testing, resting, coming back, thinking about it again. It can sound discouraging if you talk about it as a time of all kinds of emotions like anger and uncertainty and confusion or all the elation kind of things of wonder and possibilities and celebration. And it is all that, and there are times like that. And we need to go through that. If you recognize yourself in that stage, it's a time to say, way to go. I'm still in the game. I'm still making my way. I'm still moving forward. The passage stage is a time that we start to rely on something inside us. It starts to emerge. And as we start to put things together, and we're writing that great next chapter of our lives, we start to merge into this new normal stage. Now, new normal is kind of fun. New normal, you've got energy, you're forward focused, You're starting to live that next great chapter of your life. But before you go too far in that, and some of you listening to this may be in that stage, if you think back to those transitions that you raised your hand or you stood up for, some of them may be ending now. You may be in new normal. Some of them overlap, by the way. It doesn't always happen nicely, one at a time. And remember, those times are not sequential. They're not predictable. It's a time of working through things that we never thought about working through. And it's not an unsafe time. It's a time, if you have the right people around you to normalize the experience, to give you some support. It could be someone who has been through this before. It could be someone trained. It could be family members. It could be your children. It can be a really safe and energetic exploration. But when that starts to end and you start to merge into that new normal, take some time to figure out how you got there. This is your time to sort of gather up your personal transition skill set. What worked? What didn't work? What do you wish you had known before it started? What would you tell somebody else who is about to go into a transition like you were in? What are the skills that you learned? What would you do next time? And that's important because we know that life is going to continue. Life will launch the next chapter again and again, whether we want it or not. One of the truths that I figured out in building this body of work, this transition literacy body of work, was that we're actually born to do this. We are born for change. We are born for uncertainty. It has gone on since the beginning of time. The question is how are you going to address it? Each time life happens, and that destructive crack happens, you have the opportunity, the invitation to reimagine and to build that next great chapter. The secret that I also found with this is that this is a singular journey. If you think back to one of the events that you went through, you know that this is a very personal time for you. But we don't do it by ourselves. We do it within ourselves, surrounded by our support teams. Knowing how to access your support teams, how to do this, and how to celebrate together is really one of the greatest gifts of these big disruptive cracks that happen in our lives.